Hello friends, Dan Alasso here, making history, and today I want to make note of some of the elements of Obsidian that I've started using more as I've been trying to really create a personal vault that is more amenable to creating long-form output. For the most part, in the last year, what I've been doing is I've been using it to create short-form output, like blog posts and video scripts. But now I'm working on longer projects. I'm working on books. And as I've already mentioned, I'm beginning to try to distinguish between the content that I've stuffed into the vault, which is mostly longish book reviews and long reading notes that capture all of the stuff that I've taken from a particular book. And that can get into many pages. So while that is interesting and valuable and does involve paraphrasing and taking the author's ideas and beginning to turn them into my own, I think there's an additional step beyond that where I continue to translate those ideas and I begin to deal with them individually so that they can really become the atomized elements that I can slot into different narratives or different arguments. Now, as I'm thinking about this, I need to remind myself that it's not like I don't have a lot of analog experience doing this process. And I think sometimes it's useful to remind ourselves that although we've just recently come up with a lot of fancy PKM-ish names to call these processes, they are as old as reading and writing. And I was actually reminded of that this week when I lectured on the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the modern corporate form in my environmental history class. That chapter that I wrote for my OER textbook begins with the story of the Charles River Bridge between Boston, Massachusetts and Charlestown, which I've made a short video about, and I'll probably do an updated video about that this weekend. This was an interesting episode in early American history that I think I had run across as a grad student and that I thought would really encapsulate some of the ideas that I wanted to get across about the shifting definition of corporate responsibility. So I had added it to my text in much the same way that I'm thinking about adding new elements now, implementing this approach in my vault. But of course, using different older tools. In an interesting twist this week, I also assigned an economic history article to my historical method students this week that also mentions this episode in history, but from a very different, and I might say misleading, perspective and angle. So now I have even more to say in that expanded video this weekend. So as I've mentioned previously, I have darkened the notes that I already have in the graph, most of which I'm beginning to think of as source notes. And I've brightened the ones that I'm calling permanent notes. And I've actually created a new template for the permanent notes. And this is a change for me because I haven't really used templates in Obsidian before this particular book club. So this template includes a bunch of reminders of things for me to fill in. First, aliases, which I also haven't used before the last week or so, which are super helpful because they allow me to refer to the same note in slightly different terminologies so that it fits better into things that I'm writing. And then the body of the note, which I think should be about 250 to 500 words in length, and should be something that is understandable by the average reader and tells them everything they need to know about this one particular atomic topic. And then I link it to one other permanent note, which I think is the equivalent of what note would I put this directly behind if this was a physical slip box. So what's the main idea that I think has the most to do with this? And then links to sources, both within and sometimes outside of the vault itself. And then sideways links to notes that are related, but that aren't sources of the information in this particular note. And then tags and keywords. And then finally, a slot for anything that's not resolved, that is left open to do, or questions that I still need to answer about the topic, but I don't have what I need to answer them right now while I'm writing it. So now I'm going through my existing notes because, as it turns out, many of them, especially in folders like Ideas in History and People in History, Many of these were well on their way to actually being the kind of permanent note that I want to have in my box now. So I've set myself a daily quota of permanent notes to either add originally or to convert from these other notes. And one additional thing that I've used occasionally in the past, but that I'm finding super useful right now, is that I'm taking advantage of the ability to open a folder from within my main vault as an independent vault itself. And this, I think, is a really, really interesting feature of Obsidian. So what I'm actually talking about here is that you can go to the Open Folder as a Vault section of that startup window, and you can open an interior folder as a vault. And this can be super useful. For example, if I want to see my permanent notes, and only my permanent notes, and what they're linked to, in order to understand the network that's going between these notes, including which ones of them might share a link to particular source notes, like the books that I got a lot out of. So what you're looking at now is some examples of this. And the other thing that you're seeing here are the purple notes that are the uncreated notes. They're uncreated in this vault. They are actually notes that exist in my main vault. They're just not present inside of this folder, so they're showing up in this view as uncreated. So these, for the most part, are the source note. And this is one of the ways that I am learning what connects a lot of these individual atomized ideas that I'm putting into my permanent notes. So this idea that these things are real in the main vault, but are sort of ghosts in this vault, had some interesting metaphorical connections for me about the world at large, or at least the fictional world. It sort of reminds me in a spooky way of Neil Stephenson's recent book, Fall, or Dodge in Hell. In that one, of course, spoiler alert, we discover layer upon layer of simulations. So that was an interesting, fun moment for me, thinking about the metaphorical correlation between this knowledge work and the real outside world. Don't read too much into it. I think it was just a fun moment. And I hope people found this a little bit interesting. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you again soon.